try the new. Hmm? No, that's my my brother.
Thanks. Or the filter.
Yeah.
Just give me the key. I'll just like, thank you. I don't know how.
Mm, mm. Yeah. The evictions framework, it was a combination of the debt management. We were still busy with the SOP. It was a combination of the debt management thing and something else. Can I just check and then I'm gonna get, because I can't remember what was the last thing we worked on, because I also noticed now that because it wasn't approved, the draft. Let me just check. Then I'll get back. Just drop me an email. No? Okay.
Why is it? Did you?
I registered.
You registered.
Then
and
they sent me
sent
the
you
email.
link.
Yeah. And there's the email.
The coffee break until then we start the break from as long. Basket night. 10 to 11.
Where
Okay, I managed to join now.
Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, good day, everyone. I welcome you all to this breakout room and the World Planning Day organized by the eThekwini Municipality, University of KwaZulu-Natal, South African City Network, and all other partners. Welcome to the breakout room, where we hope to X-ray issues that has to do with understanding the institutional framework for co-production and its ability to deliver sustainable infrastructure. My name is Samuel Midaishe, and I will be anchoring this section with Kayla Hannah Brown as moderators. We've got four presenters here that Kayla will be introducing to us as we make progress. But as a kind of introduction, I want to take us through briefly what this section is all about. The idea of infrastructure co-production is actually not new. It has been in urban affairs for urban discourse for some times, and it has been on the front burner for quite some times now. Several academics, institutional focus have looked at how citizens can actually get involved in the process of providing infrastructure which are sustainable and acceptable for these citizens. And it is on the basis and the strength of this assertion that this year's World Planning Day is tagged looking at the paradigm of infrastructure co-production in planning and citizen engagement. Because over time, this has been the missing link. The implementation of citizen engagement has been the missing link in the process of plan implementation. All the ideals of co-production, of partnership, have actually been in most of our activities. In South Africa, when the IDP is produced, there is always the forum for interaction with the public on the content of this. In other climes, like in the case of Nigeria, when the master plan is produced, there is the room for interaction and interface with the citizens who are involved, who are going to make use of this plan. However, the challenge is, do we see through this process of ensuring that every citizen is involved, every citizen is carried along in the process of ensuring their views, their aspirations are put into consideration at the point of implementing this, infrastructure. And then you discover, in order to ensure a democratic, an efficient and effective process of infrastructure implementation, the idea of co-production is very, very important. It is important for us as planners to have the responsibility to evaluate the strengths in co-production, to see the missing link, and be able to answer the following questions. When citizens take a more significant role in design and implementation, does that transform into, does this improve urban infrastructure and services? Does co-production increase democratic level of infrastructure and service delivery? Why would citizens want to make efforts of engaging in co-creation of or co-production of infrastructure. Furthermore, are public servants in turn interested in involving them? Answering this question is not only relevant from a fundamental and scientific point of view, but it is a potential also, helping practitioners, planners, and other professionals within the built environment to understand the role, the critical role of citizens in the process of infrastructure planning and provision. Therefore, this breakout room will be addressing most of these questions. This breakout room will be addressing from the standpoint of our esteemed speakers, the ideas of infrastructure provision in planning and how this fits perfectly. At this point, I'll hand it over to Kayla to help introduce our speaker and take us to the next stage of our presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sam, and a big welcome to everybody, our audience, our panelists. This is really meant to be, the part of the webinar where we get to explore together some of the themes that we've been hearing about, and be in conversation with each other. And we are very, very lucky to have 4 incredible speakers with us today, who have been working with these concepts for quite a long time, both in an academic sense, but also in a practice sense. And in a little bit, we will be hearing from them. For now, maybe, Sam, let's introduce ourselves. So my name is Kayla Brown, and I'm a project manager at the South African Cities Network, based in Cape Town and Johannesburg, and very much with the South African lens on planning practice. Sam, let me hand over to you to introduce yourself and where you're joining us from. Okay, I think Sam's connection isn't great at the moment, but that's okay. I think we're all really struggling with connectivity at the moment. And I know for the South African colleagues, we are all fighting against load shedding. And when load shedding goes down, often our connection drops as well. So we'll keep it moving, and we're here to support you if you have any tech issues as well. But Sam, I can introduce Sam. He's actually calling in from Nigeria, but he is a PhD student at the University of KwaZulu-Natal and doing really interesting work on definitions of inclusivity, sustainability, and resilience, but in the African context. So hopefully Sam will be able to connect soon. So I think before we go into hearing from our incredible panel of speakers, who I'm going to also introduce in a little bit, I think what we really want to do in this session is kind of play out the concept of co-production. And that means not just hearing from our panelists, but actually trying to be in discussion, because everyone here in the audience does have some experience with concepts of co-production, either in research work or in their planning practice. So we really do want to make this a inclusive and participatory conversation. So you're back with us, Sam. Sorry, I know you're having some issues there.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, that's cool. I'm just going to take us into our first little our check-in. And what we are wanting to do with you is to please fill in this Mentimeter question. So I'm going to be sharing a link on the chat. Let me just copy it over. So you should see it in the chat now. And if you can open up that link, or just go to menti.com, then we can get everyone voting and contributing on this question that we're going to be sharing. So let me just share my screen. Okay, so if you can click on the link that I've shared in the chat, it's going to ask you for a code, and you can see the code at the top of the screen. So I'll just give everyone a little bit of time to get into this Mentimeter poll. And what we really want to start exploring, oh, fantastic, I see someone's already managed to find their way in. So let's start brainstorming some ideas that come to mind when we think about this term co-production, because co-production doesn't mean one thing. It's also a very contested term. It has different meanings across the world. And of course, this is an international webinar and we have international speakers. So we can't just think about what it means for us in South Africa and in a very localized sense. And there are all kinds of different implications that it has. And, you know, maybe it's not always a good thing. Maybe it's something that can cause tension and more conflict. And I really hope that we will be exploring some of these themes today. So I see 4 people have managed to get onto the Menti. Maybe we can just give it another 2 more minutes. And then we'll go to the next question. And please, even after we move on from the Mentimeter, you can still continue to populate it and we can look at it again at the end of the session. But this is great. There's so many different words coming through. So collaboration is strong, participation, partnership, together. And then, wow, so many words coming in. This is great. I love seeing the word cloud being formed. Collaborated planning, integrated planning, urban infrastructure, public participation, teamwork, partners, citizens. So I think these are all the kinds of things that we would have in our minds when we think about co-production. Okay, keep voting. I'm going to go to the next slide. So what this particular breakout room is looking at, that's slightly different from the very broad theme of the webinar, is trying to understand what are some of the institutional frameworks that enable co-production to happen. So what we mean by the institutional frameworks, it can be, you know, the policies, legislation, plans that we work with, but, you know, there could be other kinds of things. So if you think about your practice or your work that you've been doing, if you've come across any of these kinds of frameworks that might enable co-production, please share with us now. And then hopefully throughout the webinar, we'll be hearing about some more, both in a local context and a global context. And if you can't think of any, then you're also welcome to write none. And that's also useful information. Okay, so we have the spatial development framework, precinct plans. So these are all the kind of very local level planning instruments. So that's great that somebody thinks that those can enable co-production. Here we're seeing the IDPs, spatial frameworks, Municipal Systems Act, which we were chatting about earlier in the plenary session, SPLUMA. So as planners, we use a lot of acronyms, and I think let's just remember that this is an international webinar, and not everyone knows what SPLUMA is or IDP is. So if you could write out the full name, that would be better. Area plans. So for our international audience, the IDP refers to the integrated development plans, and those are the kind of 5-year collaborative planning tools that operate in a cycle and really come from Okay, I think let's leave it now. I think my internet connection is also a bit unstable now. I'm going to stop sharing. And please feel free to continue to populate the poll. We really want to, we want to harvest as much information from our audience as well as the panelists. So just to quickly take you through how we're going to be structuring the day, not the day, but the next 2.5 hours. So we'll continue just to do the short introduction, and I'll introduce the speakers quickly. I'll then hand over to Sam, who will facilitate our panelist discussion, and each panelist will have about 20 minutes to share their presentation and share the incredible work that they have been doing. In between the panelists, we will stop for a short break. It will be a 10-minute break just to get some more coffee or get some more water. We'll then come back, watch a short video, and have the final 2 panelists. And then what we're going to do is have all of our discussion and conversation right at the end. But what we can encourage you to do is just to keep posting your questions, any interesting ideas you have on the chat. So let's keep the chat moving. And then we'll refer back to those questions right at the end and open it up. Bring in our panelists, bring in the audience, and hopefully get a nice, robust conversation going. Sam, is there anything to add, or can I introduce our speakers?
Yes, Kayla, please go on and introduce our speakers. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. So we really have a wonderful group of panelists with us today. Their focus is broad, their context is broad. So first we'll have Dr. Catalina Ortiz, who is a Colombian urbanist.
Yeah. Okay, I think Kayla's internet is frozen at this time. Can everyone hear me? All right. So the first on our list will be introducing Dr. Catalina Ortiz, who is a Colombian urbanist and is working as an associate professor and core program leader of the MSc Building and Urban Design in Development at University College London in the United Kingdom. She also had her honors to study under her during, Dr. Catalina happens to be Kayla's master's supervisor. So it's a privilege having you here, Dr. Ortiz. Thank you very much. Second on this list is Dr. Faith Kasim, who is a senior lecturer in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning, University of Ibadan, Nigeria. He shall be speaking on behalf of Professor Bolanle Wahab, who is unavoidably absent. Both Dr. Kasim and Professor Bolanle Wahab were my teachers at master's level at the University of Ibadan. They've impacted so much in me, and you're going to have a feel of what they offer. Here also, we're going to have Debbie Hendricks, who is the operation executive at the Mandela Bay Development Agency, which is the development agency of the Nelson Mandela Bay municipality. And so she has over 20 years of hands-on everyday experience working with communities to deliver infrastructure and projects. The last but not the least on our list of presenters today is Professor Arnel Duplessis, who is a professor of law and an NRF South Africa Research Chair in Cities, Law and Environmental Sustainability at the Northwest University in South Africa. She's widely published and will bring her very interesting combination of legal and planning knowledge to the conversation. On this note, I welcome every one of you our panelists to this discussion today. And I welcome every professional planner, every planner here on this platform today. And I wish us a very wonderful and splendid deliberation. On this note, I want to kickstart the presentation with taking the presentation by Dr. Catalina Ortiz. Please, if you're ready, Doctor, you can share your screen and let's have you. Thank you very much.
Hello, welcome everyone. I'm very happy to be here with you. Thank you for the introduction. And this topic is very exciting. I've been working and trying to understand how can we actually produce the cities we care for together. As my introduction said, I'm Colombian. I have worked there for many years and now recently working across the globe with different partners. So what I'm going to present today are just some few reflections and examples to keep us thinking in a general overview. How can we learn together also of how to make co-production happen? And I think it's very provocative, the topic of the whole encounter we're having here in terms of understanding how to strengthen this paradigm. And I think the notion of paradigm is very interesting to see how can we actually come to grips to this important challenge. So I will be speaking briefly. We have only 20 minutes and hopefully we'll have time afterwards to engage so we can clarify any questions. So I'm going to try to cover a few of the ideas in terms of the premises, concepts, principles, tensions, and how co-production kind of lead us to inclusive planning. So basically, I have just kind of 3 points, 3 key messages today, and I'm going to try to use some examples to show this. First of all, I think the key premise that I'm sure you were already discussing during the plenary is that strengthening a new paradigm requires an incremental cultural shift and unlearning somehow business as usual. And therefore, the idea of co-learning is pivotal to actually understand and create an understanding and a practice of co-production. Second, that embracing co-production paradigm in a way results in an integrated and inclusive planning system. So in a way, I see co-production and learning and putting in action co-production as a basis, as a precondition to actually create an integrated inclusive planning system. And thirdly, urban planning in this regard, if we use, let's say, co-production as kind of the underpinning force of this cultural shift, needs to be then understood in all its complexities and also contradictions at the same time. And therefore, part of the key challenges is precisely understanding how to make it multidimensional, multi-scale, multi-actor process for achieving socio-spatial justice. It was already discussed briefly what are kind of the different definitions, and I think it's important, and as Kayla said, it's a very contested term, and everyone is kind of trying to figure out how to make a productive operational that helps to understand our planning processes. But I think something that is worth noticing, at least what has been discussed in the literature, is that to what extent, is different from business as usual in terms of participatory processes and the whole, practices of participation, and to what extent the co-production paradigm fits very well, particularly to the cities in the South, where, as we know, has been built by the urban dwellers themselves, and therefore is pivotal to work together as part of the urban, to devise better urban solutions if we work together. But it has been also very, discussed to what extent then co-production, what are the processes that co-production entail? And I think it's very interesting to see how more and more we see the co in every, let's say, stage or phase of planning. And therefore, I think it's interesting to see how some of the recent debates suggest that co-production needs to include design, planning, management, implementation, finance, and learning. And I think that is both exciting but challenging at the same time, right? So where do you draw the line, in other words, when we're talking about co-production? And what is also important in the different definitions and more current definitions, particularly the ones that connect somehow the co-production of services that would be more connected to the delivery of infrastructure, but also the co-production of knowledge and how can you need in a way to connect these two. And in the discussions so far, it's very clear and apparent that we need to understand or at least frame co-production as a tool to advance social justice and urban sustainability. And therefore, if that is the aim, then it's very important to understand also the political nature of co-production, in as much as it requires or it aims to shift the usual power relations. And I think that's why it's so important, but also so contested when we talk about co-production. And I think understanding co-production as an instrument of urban governance can help us to think differently how we frame policy, but also how part of this big challenge is to sustain and shape differently long-term relationship with the different actors that shape the city. So in other words, trying to understand what is the contribution of each one of the actors in shaping the city's present and future. And therefore recognizing the different resources contribution that each actor has. And part of what we've been doing in one of the kind of research projects we are in, it's called KNOW, is thinking precisely how then co-production can be used as this governance tool to produce or to sustain urban equality. How can we build pathways to urban equality? And in that way, I think it has been important for us to understand what are these dimensions of equality and to what extent co-production then needs to engage with these different dimensions in order to be, serving the purpose of actually fostering social justice. So I think here it's a very kind of simple diagram to understand these 4 dimensions of urban equality. Equitable distribution, parity in political participation, reciprocal recognition, and epistemic justice. And for us has been very important to also bring to the fore the idea of epistemic justice and trying to acknowledge or having, in a way, the humility to understand that several knowledges count when it comes to defining and shaping our cities. But also, it's been very important for us to understand how we cannot, in a way, reproduce the systems of inequality even when engaging in co-productive process. And in that regard, it's absolutely important to have an intersectional approach to co-production. Trying to understand what are the myriad contributions, but also perspectives and expectations in terms of all the different aspects that shape our experience in the city and our social diversity that is super important when we are talking about recognizing particularly the specificities of the needs and aspirations of citizens. And we have trying to put together what are these principles, because one of the key elements of addressing co-production is actually defining a joint set of values that operate as principles to actually work together and navigate differences, dissensus, and conflict. So part of the principles that we've been thinking and devising is the idea of that it needs to be a situated practice, that it's identifies the context, that is strategic, that is transdisciplinary, horizontal, reflexive, and in a very interesting work that you must be more familiar with the Isandla Institute, also talks about the principles of trust, dignity, transparency, accountability. So these are very important elements that may seem very abstract, but at the end of the day is what can actually sustain a legitimate process of co-production. But of course, as I said, co-production is not absent of tensions, and I think it has been identified, let's say, at least 4 key tensions in these processes. One, to what extent you need to institutionalize this and embed these in the regulatory frameworks, and to what extent, what is the room for flexibility and from operating, let's say, outside the bureaucratic structures. The second tension goes around process versus output. What do you co-produce? What do you give more relevance? The delivery of a particular infrastructure or the process and the capacity building across actors? The third tension relates to cooperation versus conflict, and I think it's very important to address that conflict is always going to be present, and to what extent a part of the ideas and agreements that a co-production process needs to give room for how to deal and how to handle conflict in a productive way. So more understanding conflict as a productive force rather than a destructive force of co-production. The other tension is in terms of thinking about several interventions that are more place-based versus a vision of a citywide system. And I think that's where part of the iterations and experimentation that we've been seeing are also operating. So going back to the first premise that I propose is that co-production in a way results in an inclusive planning. And I think since we are celebrating the World Planning Day, it's important to kind of revisit kind of what are the drivers and the kind of aims if we want to actually use these processes and co-production as a tool to foster more equality and inclusivity in the society. And therefore, we have to go beyond just bringing more voices to the table by actually considering all these dimensions of urban equality that I was referring to, trying to understand to what extent then help us this tool to redistribute resources, to achieve parity in political participation, to what extent planning is using reciprocal recognition, and most importantly, how inclusive planning and co-production help us to integrate the plurality of knowledges in the production of the city. And for that, because I'm a bit, I think I have still 9 minutes, I'm gonna give some examples that are mostly drawn from this research project, Knowledge in Action for Urban Equality, that we are almost concluding, and where we've been the chance to actually engage and see several practices of co-production in different scales from different entry points. And one particular one that is very interesting and has been evolving very nicely is the idea of having learning alliances. So in a way, the entry point to work together across city actors is the notion of learning alliance. And particularly, DPU has been, my institution has been very involved in shaping the role of the Sierra Leone Urban Research Center, kind of as a precursor in initiative to actually start the capacity building of local officials, of local researchers to actually address issues of urban planning in a place where urban planning, let's say, as a discipline has been somehow absent. And something that has been very crucial in the Sierra Leone case is the political will, particularly of the mayor Yvonne Aki Sawyer, that has been a key leader and a key figure that has embraced the idea of working together in this city learning platform that operates kind of in 3 levels and 3 scales. The community learning platforms that are meant to work around informal settlement and upgrading in the local level, in a more, let's say, neighborhood level. In an interface of a city level space where in a way is also connected to the National Development Plan. So I think here working directly with the Freetown initiative and agenda has been a very productive way of trying to think in a multi-scalar way how to co-produce the vision of the city and implementing particular methodologies to make this come to fruition. And I can share afterwards some of the resources in the chat for you to see kind of the particular kind of practitioners briefs that the team of the No Project and SLAR has been developing. The other classical example that I think is always very interesting and inspiring to see is the Community Organizations Development Institute, CODI in Thailand. and as part of this, let's say, major regional work of the Asian Coalition of Housing Rights. So some could say, well, but that has already happened. It's been, for a very long time. Why should we see this from the lenses of co-production? And I think something interesting about this initiative of the Community Organization Development Institute is particularly creating this kind of meso-level institution that allows to kind of broke the connections between the networks of organized communities, particularly communities that work on community savings, to the different layers that this other, let's say, more city-level institution with national funding can manage and maneuver. So I think that the Community Organization Development Institute has been very well known by the Bangman program and their very interesting approach to upgrade informal settlements, but also to offer different strategies, mixing loans and subsidies. And I think that's a very interesting approach to create this institution whose mission is actually redistribute and decentralize resources for empowering and giving directly to organized community the resources for them to actually pursue the transformation or co-lead the development of housing options or slum upgrading, depending upon the area where they are working. And something also essential for them is kind of the pairing with the work with the Communities Architects Network, where they have devised a very interesting set of methodological repertoires to do a collective visioning of how to think together and create and co-design the different spatial arrangements as well as the social organization for make these visualizations happen and tangible. So I think this work in tandem with the Asian Coalition of Housing Rights, CODI, and the Community Architects Network is a very interesting arrangement that allows like a multi-layer, a multi-dimensional approach. And some of the examples that are also learning from that experience of the Thai case have been somehow transported and adapted in the case of Myanmar in Yangon, where before the political issues that are happening now, it was created a community-led housing committee led by women, led by the Women for the World organization, where we could see a very interesting alliance with the regional government, with international organizations, and also part of the Asian Coalition of Housing Rights. And I think in a very bold move, the Yangon City Development Committee and the Yangon Regional Government were able to, let's say, offer the land to these groups. And they, in a very interesting strategy, were able to develop housing in very record time. And very quickly to other, let's say, dimension of this four level, let's say, inclusive planning, co-production has to do a lot, as I said, to developing what we call kind of epistemic justice. And in that regard, understanding and including plurality of knowledges is key. And you know this better than I, are more familiar with this. I think it's fascinating, the Know Your City campaign, in trying to understand how can we introduce to the, let's say, traditional quote unquote, and transform the understanding we have about urban informal settlements, but particularly what is the role of community-driven data in planning processes. And I think we have seen across the region in many places and different iterations of these different strategies of Islam profiling, community-driven data, and how the SDI network has been very, very important in using the strategy of data generation, community data generation, also as a strategy of community organizing. And I think that strength and that level of awareness and social mobilization is key to actually have any sustained co-production process. And lastly, because I have 47 seconds, I think it's very important also to think of these different experiences that talk about co-production also in terms of participatory budgeting, or what is the influence in the definition of budgets, right? What are the priorities and how the public spending then needs to be also part of what needs to be decided together. And I think there has been a lot of work around participatory budgeting and how this tool that was devised in Porto Alegre, Brazil, has been kind of the most exported planning tool across the world. But just to conclude, I think few challenges kind of remain and kind of are clear as a cross-cutting elements of all these examples that I've been going through very quickly. It is that a strengthening co-production paradigm requires a long-term cultivation of collective trust and legitimation, and I think that is precisely what makes the thing important, particularly in places where there are a lot of fragmentation and tensions, and particularly after the pandemic, with all these clashes have been exploding. Second, that institutional design needs to support a decentralized governance structure. I think the case of the CODI is very, very interesting for that. Building alliances.
The conference commercial.
I think someone left the microphone on. I'm about to finish. Building alliances, particularly the model of learning alliances that in the Freetown case, I think is very interesting to look at and learn about. Focus on developing distributed capacities. In most of the examples, part of the success of these examples is precisely getting and bringing institutions such as SLARC as an urban research center, as a space that helps to do capacity building across different actors. And finally, reframing the planning tools. We cannot go with business as usual, but we need to be more creative in bringing different methodologies of engagement, and particularly now, how to bring in the digital sphere different strategies to actually engage with people now that we are in a way apart. So sorry I took a bit more time, but I hope we can keep discussing this afterwards.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Ortiz, for that wonderful presentation. I have tried to look at our charts. Questions have not come in yet, but hopefully, as we make progress, maybe some questions will come in, and we will take it in our question and answer session. But all things being equal, thank you very much, Dr. Ortiz, for this wonderful presentation. We really appreciate it. Next on our presentation line is the presentation by Professor Bolanle Wahab and Dr. Faith Kazim. And this presentation will be taken by Dr. Faith Kazim. Dr. Kazim, over to you, sir.
Yeah, good morning from here. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, very well.
I don't want to share my video because I think I will be having network issue with video on, but I'll try as much as possible to do justice without the video. So this is me, Kazim. I'm standing in for Professor Bolanle Wahab. Yeah, maybe thank you for the opportunity for us to be here, and apology from Professor Wahab for not being able to be here today. I think he has another engagement in the university that he has to address urgently, being in a strategic position within the university setting today. So I will try as much as possible to fill in the gap for him. I know I can't speak like him, but I'll try as much as possible to do justice to the issue at hand.
Sorry, Dr. Kasim, can I just come in?
Yes, ma'am.
Maybe if you can just come a little bit closer to your microphone,
Okay.
then we can hear you loudly.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect, perfect. Thank you, Doctor. Please proceed.
You're welcome. So this is what we have today. We'll try to look at community sensitization and risk management as a way of co-production for, it may not necessarily be for the infrastructure that we focused on, but again, we know the importance of disaster management to sustainability of infrastructure. If your environment is sustained, is protected against the heal of the environment, that means the existing infrastructure that you have to be protected. So while our home focus for this will be a little bit deviation from the production of the infrastructure that's required. We'll look at how we can sustain the available infrastructure of the environment sustainable. This the outline for this presentation. Introduction, we look at conceptual issues that we need to address. We look at community sensitization, community participation in risk management, the challenges that will come on board, and then in concluding, we'll look at what we've done for the Nigeria setting on now we've used this co-production of engaging the society in making the environment at least protected or impact of disaster being reduced within a given environment in the Nigerian setting. So as a way of introduction, we look at today, there is no saying that disaster is happening every day. No environment is protected. The impact may be different, or the kind of disaster that each environment is exposed to may be different. But in all, looking at it strategically, we know that every society has its own fair share of what disaster can do, and how that disaster is being protected will determine how sustainable the environment will be. We look at within this issue of disaster being frequent, the causal effect now is climate change. You know, climate change will come in two different dimensions, water too little or water too much. If the water is too much, you get flooding. If the water is too little, you get drought. So within this means that climate change is going to present itself. We need to look at how well are we exposed to it and what can we do in our own community to respond to the issue that climate change will bring on board. Another issue that we have is environmental degradation. The way planning is being done, especially in this part of the world, call for a whole lot of attention. And if those attention is not being given, you allow people to do what they feel is right for them, they may not be doing what they feel is right for them for their environment. And that will lead to environmental degradation. And above all, too, within the context of developing countries, Nigeria inclusive, poverty is increasing. And when you have poverty being increasing, where people cannot really get what they can use to sustain themselves, the most appropriate place for them to reside may be an area vulnerable to disaster. And the outcome of disaster is you have loss of life, property will be damaged, breaking in development trajectory, and increasing poverty. When you look at breaking in development trajectory, for example, I have a road being constructed, and maybe the construction does not put in disaster reduction with public participation within it. If the road is washed away, I'm still going to use scarce resources to resurface or to reconstruct that road. So at this level, when you are looking at the participation in sustaining what you've done, you will see why we need to address disaster in all ramifications so that the development gain today will not be something that will be reconstructing tomorrow. But within this element of causal factor, we want to isolate response. And that isolation, we want to focus is on how community within this context of disaster management, how are the communities being consulted? What is the sensitization mechanism being in place? And how participatory they are in making the environment their home. Because the most important thing when you talk about disaster management is people that are exposed to disaster or where the disaster happens, people are living there. And if these people, set up people are not taking into consideration when you are planning for a disaster management, the whole efforts of your planning will be defeated. And until we look at how we can incorporate a specific element of the environment, which is the people habitation, into how disaster is being managed, majority of our effort may not be the effort that will give us a sustainable development being anticipated. The major concern when you look at the issue, that's the conceptual issue that we want to look at, we need to just give us a brief incline into what disaster management is, or disaster itself. For anything to be disaster, or for whatever clarification you want to give to a disaster, at least there will be a disruption in the settlement functionality beyond the capacity of the affected society to respond using its own resources. So wherever you're looking for external help to address whatever perturbation that your environment is fixed, is being classified as disaster. Risk is the probability of hazard occurring, and most often than not, it is the product of your hazard and vulnerability. That is how exposed is to a natural hazard is your environment is. And now are people gravitating towards this hazard? The hazard can be there, dormant, and there's no gravitation towards it. It's there. It's expected that the way the world is being structured, there are some pertinent hazard that will happen. But if it happens and there is no disruption to the first definition that we give, nothing being disrupted, the capacity of the society can still continue without any other thing. It is just a mere hazard. So it honestly, we gravitated towards that hazard as human being based on our activity and what we've done that would translate that risk as it were into a disaster. Disaster risk reduction is a framework to avoid or prevent and all limits mitigate disaster. That is within development strategy that we want to look at now. For example, you want to do a road construction. How do you build disaster risk reduction into this road in terms of maybe the structure, the construction, the structure of the road? Can it withstand any perturbation? And if you are building within an environment that is vulnerable, what are the strategies that you've put in place to protect those kind of infrastructure that you've provided? Those are the issues that disaster reduction will bring on board. Disaster risk management is for us the administrative structure. What are the structure in place within the government, the community, and every stakeholder within a given environment that can allow you to implement citizen to lessen the impact of disaster. So within this element of disaster reduction, we want to look at the collectiveness of disaster management, that is from government to the individual. How are they connected? What are the processes that we expected to put in place for us to get to involve society in our disaster management attributes? Again, the last one, we want to look at community. Community is a group of individuals and also living in the same location because our focus in this environment is on disaster management. We want to look at those communities living in an environment that had the same exposure of hazard. Community could be anything, as we had now in this breakaway section. We are communities together because we have a major focus. How do we co-produce infrastructure? But within these elements, when you're looking at community, that is to transcend to every level. But what is important is what is the uniqueness of that community in the focus of where you are addressing it. So for our focus now, we want to look at community as a group of people that are exposed to a given hazard within their own environment, and then how can they cope in responding to the expected hazard within their environment. Community sensitization, which is a focus of what we need to do, is a multi-way communication and interaction process that provide opportunity for people to dialogue and strengthen interest and commitment to sustainable risk management. And within the principle of community sensitization, you have 4 basic issues that we need to address: consistency and standard message. When you are dealing with community, you need to go to community at all times with the same kind of information. And if that information is going to
Have we lost Dr. Kasim? Dr. Kasim, can you hear us? Oh dear. Okay. The tech has not been on our side today. Okay, he has dropped off the call. I wonder if, Sam, we shouldn't go on to our break now.
Okay, I think it will be fine. Maybe we just progress on our break now and we'll come back to hit it up.
Okay, great. So colleagues, we will be taking a short 10-minute break. And then in that time, I hope Dr. Kasim is able to jump back on. We'll be coming back and then showing a video and then moving into our 2 next speakers who are going to be focusing more on a South African context. So please use this opportunity to reflect on what you've been hearing from Dr. Ortiz and Dr. Kasim, and grab a coffee, grab some water, and we will be back shortly. Sam, anything else from your side?
No, I think I'm comfortable now. We can go ahead with the break. Kayla, thank you.
Okay, cool. So we'll come back then at 5 past.
Hi, Kayla. Can we go on now?
Hey, Sam. Okay, I think everybody back.
Yeah, I think everyone is
Break
back.
and left. And I see Dr. Kasim is back in the room. So let's try one more time to finish up with his presentation, and then we'll move on to the video.
All right. So Dr. Kasim, we're back, and let's finish up with your presentation, sir. You have the floor.
Yeah, thank you again for the opportunity. So I'm so sorry for being off the internet. Some things that we can't control, but again, I don't want that to happen because it disrupts the flow. I'm so sorry for whatever else would have caused. But again, let us try to do justice to this. Maybe that is part of the sort of life happened within our own community. So how do we mediate that, and what can we do to make it sustainable for us to have the continuation of this process that we have? So I'll try as much as possible to involve everybody in terms of us using this opportunity experience that we have now, in terms of how can we make our own environment sustainable or strengthened to withstand or to recover from whatever perturbation that have happened. So within the consistency, we want to see that if you're singing the same message, that allow that message to be the same message that you're singing. And if there's any time that there's going to be a change, for example, I'm trying to use the Nigerian setting as a vivid example. Based on the climatical arrangement for Nigeria, the northern part is more of arid or semi-arid, or savanna as we call it in our own climate. And the southern part is more of a rainforest, which by its location will be susceptible to flooding. But we realize now that over the years now, flooding has been happening in similitude protected environment against flooding, especially in the north. So if you want to commit, if you want to take community if you want to change the mindset of our people now on how they have to address flooding within the environment that is not exposed, we need to find a way of putting information to them. And that kind of information that we're bringing on board should be a consistency. We need to anchor on something, and we need to look at somebody that we can use as a driver. And that is why we are having the legitimacy and credibility. Who is going to drive this process? How is it being viewed within the community? What authority does he have? And what will I say, the arrangement that this guy can carry to make the environment or to make people believe in what information that you are preaching. So it goes beyond just being the information being consistent. The process of getting the information across to you should be legitimate and be credible. That is, if I'm to talk about something, how would community see it? Would they gravitate toward in believing that this is the right information that needs to be propagated within that environment? And then we look at scalability. In this regard, we're looking at if anything happened, how do we make this information available to a larger community? And depending on the setting, and how do we make the same information available to a minute community? So how do we scale things? Depending on the scale of disaster that you're going to have or that is intending, that will determine how scalable or the scale at which the propagation of the information will be. And above all, sustainability, which is the anchor on which whatever we want to discuss now, since the day that we've been talking about sustainable development, whatever we want to talk about that, how sustainability it is, how do stability see it as something that is within them? How do they get it buy-in? How do they see the product that you are showcasing as something that they believe in? And for you to get to the level of sustainability, you have to be consistent, you have to have legitimacy, and you have to provide the right kind of information in terms of scale that you're going to use in providing it to people for them to see this project that we're talking about as something that they recognize with and something that they want to imbibe into their whole system in making the environment sustainable. So how do we now make this information available? What are the tools that we can use for community sensitization? And we listed like 7, and I think this is not exhausted, depending on the environment that you find yourself. And again, for us, maybe what is most important now, or maybe what we are doing now in Nigeria is social media have taken over information dissemination structure. And how do we engage with this social media? Maybe for us, we had one little experience or little research that we did, trying to go to Facebook. And because in Nigeria, we have a National Emergency Management Agency, which is the coordinating agency for managing disaster. We want to see how we're engaging the Emergency Management Authority in Nigeria have been using social media. We realize that within the provision for social media, they've not really utilized this structure in making information about disaster management across both all Nigeria. And again, too, maybe we will be proposing now that this is an opportunity for them to engage with citizens, because social media will give you first-hand information. And if it's not corrected, you can have a whole lot of distorted message that will go out of that. If there is no structure in place for government to, or whoever that is responsible for disaster management, to provide the right kind of information. Maybe it's now moving forward now, for you to use social media, you need telecommunication. And again, to coming to class now, we have the distortion. If we want to use social media as a means of communication, of engaging with community, what is the strength, what is the capability of our internet facility to provide that? And how do we get across this? What alternative can we use? And we know for in Nigeria today, a whole lot of issues that you can use through radio and TV, the mass media. How engaging are we using this to make the information available as a tool? And our publication and research, how well have we been using it? Do we have an intake that we are taking information back to the society? The uptake of your info, of your research that you've done. Have you gone back, for example, if you research about a disaster in a given community, have you gone back to tell the community that this is what this research is doing? How well?
I'm able to get into them with my Gmail.
Hello?
Sorry, Dr. Kusim, please continue. We've muted Kurt.
Okay. So again, we can use performing arts, a whole lot of movie being produced within the context of Nigeria. How do we incorporate disaster management into the movie scene? Because most often when you've seen something, where you've already engaged with it, it will be easy for us to like interact with you. And again, game and competition, how do we incorporate disaster management as a means of saying whatever game that we want to play or whatever activity that you're doing within a given society, how do you allow what people are used to within that society to like engage them in terms of disaster management? Those are the way we can move forward in using sensitization and the tool available for us to engage people in terms of disaster management and risk reduction in the country. So moving forward now, we want to look at community participation and involvement in key management, in risk management. For us, this is a process through which people with an interest or stakeholder influence and share control over development initiative. Community participation as a process has the following objective. The overarching objective is for us to make the environment safe and better, or well prepared, or well equipped for it to withstand whatever perturbation that will happen within the environment. And it allows us to, as we are bringing a project now, for every stakeholder within that environment to understand the kind of things that we want to do. And again, it allows us to mitigate any possible opposition from beneficiary. Most often than not, if you're bringing a project that is going to change the mindset of people, change the orientation that they have in terms of culture, which is strategic in this environment, is strong. There will be opposition. But within the context of participation, those oppositions has to be addressed before the community will see a buy-in. And most often, if the opposition is coming from somebody that is respectable, that is, we've talked about legitimacy. If within the community you have a legitimacy arrangement too, if the person that is opposing whatever process that you want to do in terms of mitigating or preparing or responding to disaster within a given environment, you need to, the community participation allows you to view all opposition, see that people have a buy-in, and then you have, within this process, if you have this buy-in, you have collective exercise of learning to solve common problems. That is, every other angle is valid when you talk about disaster management. No matter how mundane the information coming from somebody, it has to be addressed. Because if it's not addressed, and that person that you shut down has legitimacy within the society, that means he may be able to influence the society against what they should do. But when you allow the discussion and then you allow superior argument to come on board, and then take whatever information that the society is giving you, and you process this information together collectively, that means you're going to arrive at its conclusion or a situation where you see the need why they should do what they are doing, and they will see the need why you should do what you're doing, and then you meet at a point. And when you meet at a point, maybe disaster happens, they realize that the benefit of what you are doing now outweigh the benefit that they have hitherto. They can see, you can now scale up. That is, this is where we were before. We want to go forward now based on what we've done now. And they've seen the good result of what we've done. So you will see a way of, it will be a process of people engaging or involving in them seeing what you're bringing on board as something that is beneficiary. And it also assists the community group to clarify and express their need and take collective action in meeting their own need. That means in planning balance now, we're saying we don't plan for people again, we plan with them. And community participation in disaster reduction to allow you to plan with the people. At least the plan is people focused, people oriented. How do they view what you're bringing on board? And what is benefit in what you're bringing on board to them? And how will it affect the livelihood within that environment? Because the need to of people within that environment has to be addressed for us to have an engaging community participation also in disaster risk management. So what are the requirements for us to get community being engaged in risk management? One of the basic ones is for us to have the enabling environment. And the enabling environment is a two-way direction from the government and from the citizen that you're planning for. What are the level of engagement? What are the things that they have? What are the things that they're going to bring on board in making whatever attribute or whatever you want to talk about come on board? And then the organization of the community. Do they have a structure in place? What kind of structure do they have in place? How do you want to use this structure to propagate the information that you're bringing on board? And then when they have an environment, the structure is built, the sensitization strategy too that you want to adopt. And that will take us back to the devices when we're talking about the tool. What tool do you want to use to engage the society? And within this element, there's need for us to train and continue to retrain and to facilitate whatever things that are available, and then increase capacity of people that will engage when you're doing the when you are taking care of projecting the community participation in disaster in risk management in the society. So, but basically in every society, this is what we have. That is the level of community participation from the enabler, the person that is bringing on board the community participation, and the community that's going to take it. What are the relationships? You have this, basically is a global standard by Sherry Hamston that's saying for whatever participation, there is participation of you just informing people, and then participation of people being involved. For us to get a sustainable participation, people has to be involved. You have to see the need why what you're bringing on board is something that will be beneficiary to them. And then they would have to like be engaged in terms of them providing some basic infrastructure. And again, maybe we need to clarify this. In disaster management, we believe that those that we're responding to has no capacity to improve their own status. But we need to realize within this engagement now that we are championing, that within them they've been responding to this disaster times immemorial. So within those environments, there are capacity that they need to do. And those capacity can only be identified when you do vulnerability and capability assessment. So when you realize that this capacity is what they have, and you integrate that capacity into your discussion, not just you informing them or you telling them what to do, this level of engagement, this level of buy-in will have been increased in saying they want to see the need why they should be engaged in something that will give them a better environment.
Hello, Dr. Please round up now. Thank you.
Okay. We want to look at the challenges. A whole lot of challenges are here. But basically, maybe I'll just flag through some. Level of awareness of disaster disaster risk is a major issue that is militating against how an environment can be, we can engage with the environment. And this is a notion of you having three basic things. People don't really have, people have short memory when about disaster. They believe that it will never happen within their lifestyle. So religiously too, you need to like look at how you're going to engage. And again, within the body of people that need to like provide this information, you have what you call the tough protection. That is, who is the champion in disaster management? For example, if you're looking at Nigeria context now, the National Emergency Management is the coordinating agency. But for specific disaster that you want to talk about, if, for example, you're talking about flooding now, Nigerian Fire Service has a predominantly role to play. But do they allow them to play this role? And if they are playing this role, do they coordinate with other agencies that has clear-cut responsibility in doing this? And then at this level, how are community being engaged with in taking this information further? So we need to look at this and then rounding up, we've already listed a whole lot of approach, and we believe that consultation, mobilization, and sensitization is key for us to have an environment that is protected against risk. And for us to successfully implement all these programs, we need budgetary allocation. It is not just by allocation. The fund being allocated to do all this job has to be deployed for us to get the required information to the people, and then for them to see the buy-in, why they should be involved in participating in managing risk within their own environment. So thank you for your time. If there is any question, I will entertain it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Faith, for presenting to us. Really appreciate this. Even though we had the internet glitches, but then we're still able to deliver on this. If I get a confirmation from Kayla, I think we should put in the video at this time. I think we should put in the video at this time and let people see some of the activities of one of our presenters here, Debbie Hendricks, at the Nelson Mandela Bay agency, right? All right, so please put on the video and let people see. Thank you.
Helen Vale, Mbecha, has to be one of the toughest areas in the world to implement urban projects. It has the highest number of gangs per square meter in the entire Eastern Cape province. Yet, for almost a decade, the Mandela Bay Development Agency has been implementing a wide range of interventions, from buildings and public spaces to counseling, training and support. It has rewritten how projects like these are implemented in township contexts, and it has managed to build bridges between gangs, residents, ward councillors and business. The Helen Vale SBUU is the most complex and fulfilling project the Mandela Bay Development Agency has embarked on in their 17 years of existence. Helen Vale is a township in Gqeberha, which was planned in apartheid and is home to 21,000 residents in 6,000 homes. The residents are plagued with severe social and economic challenges. Despite these challenges, the team at the MBDA have been able to implement the program they call Safety and Peace through Urban Upgrading. I meet Debbie Hendricks, Operations Manager. She shares with us some of the insights gained through the project's implementation. George Jerry, a social facilitator, has been working at the MBDA. He has brought over 30 years of experience in political activism to create a model for a people-centered approach to community development.
Development is not just about the bricks and mortar, it's about developing the person.
We are not here to stop gang violence. That's the job of the police. We are not interfering in the gangs and those kind of things. Through our programs, we hope that gang members or young people would be enticed to participate in the programs. So it's kind of a more indirect approach. So we have no business to be in conflict with a gang member. But when we do a project in his or her street, you're welcome, you participate in the meetings, you can join. Mm-hmm. So we respected them as people, and for us, they were part of the Helenvale community. They are not separate from the Helenvale community.
So in Helenvale, there was a lobby group of people that said, we are asking the president of the country and said, come and talk to us. Stop ignoring us, come and talk to us. We need a bit of help.
While the MBDA has implemented a range of built interventions to improve the community, the psychosocial aspect of the project has been the most impactful. After the Helenvale Resource Centre became a no-go zone due to gang tensions, the MBDA had to come up with an alternative solution to remain effective in maintaining safety and peace throughout the ward. They implemented counselling access points providing support to victims of gender-based and domestic violence, as well as youth career guidance.
So if you talk the schools, they would mention dropouts, children, being abused at home and not having a place to go to. So the counseling centers was an automatic response to that.
So there are people at the bottom area that will never come here. The people from the top area that will never come here. So when we said, but the projects were all over, and the projects are for everybody.
So we had two options. We had the MBDA building or the stadium. And we were looking in terms of what is more resourceful, and we came to the stadium.
It came at a time when the projects has halted. There were a lot of victimization, contractors being gun-pointed, run off the sites, gang fights, the area being too volatile for contract workers to come in, for staff to come in. So everything just ground to a halt. And we then got brutally honest with the community to say, this is yours to lose. What are we as a collective, but essentially the community of Helenvale going to do to ensure that that doesn't happen? So we need safety on the sites. We need commitment from all the structures, that whatever happens on site, we will keep talking. We will not stop the project. The bus can move, you can talk on a moving bus. The bus doesn't have to stop to talk. So there's no reason to stop a project, everything can be resolved. The agency is fairly small, so it's a small engine, but it's got a lot of agility to do things a lot quicker than a municipality can typically do, and conclude a lot more partnerships with different entities and community organizations, etc., that the municipality struggles to do. So over the years, there's been a number, obviously the KfW Bank being the main funder, but I mean that's led to other initiatives like with GIZ, but the government departments, the Department of Education, Department of Social Development, I mean, they are of funding some of the counsellors at the CAP centres, which is the counselling access points that we have at schools and at the police stations, etc.
For schools that we work with, that's a very dynamic partnership that we have there. With the clinic, with the police station itself, we have signed up the social infrastructure, the churches, etc. So we have built quite a strong partnership in Helenvale itself with various stakeholders.
Partnerships or collaborations, they're actually hard work. They don't happen by themselves. You think you invite somebody to a meeting that they automatically would just come and just participate. So there's a lot of lobbying, there's a lot of leg work, there's a lot of trade-offs. So what benefits are there? What exchanges are there? What, how do you put a puzzle together where 1 + 1 doesn't give you 2, it gives you 5, So if you can convince the Minister of Education or Arts and Culture, the responses are generally very positive, and we've had some lasting impact from that.
It's footwork, It's meeting people, asking people for meetings, visiting them at their houses. So it's trying to open that up and bring everybody into one space. You can have one ward where the ward councillor is very lax and he gives you kind of a carte blanche, do as you please, interact with the people. And you can go to another ward where a councillor is that everything must come through me. You start with me first. You can get in one ward you have where the main stakeholder is the ward committee, and in another one the dominant stakeholder is an SMME group.
People approach us now to say, but we want to work with you because of that. Because we feel heard, we feel accommodated, and there's a responsiveness and so forth. We as an organisation are quite reflective at this point to say that we have been known as a building company. We build stuff. Nice things, but does it make a difference? And the honest answer is, maybe, but not always, and certainly not in the ways that matter. Yeah. So I feel like the experience that we have in Helenvale has really added to our skill set and to our knowledge base, and that if you can do this in Helenvale, then you can really do this anywhere.
Okay, thanks, Sam. We can stop there, and we can hand over to Debbie.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kayla, for that wonderful piece from the Mandela Bay Development Agency. And the next presentation is going to be coming up from one of the key inspiring agents from the video that you have just seen, in person of Debbie Hendricks, who happens to be one of the key person in that video that you have just seen, and she'll be sharing a lot of her knowledge in terms of the work they have done in the Nelson Mandela Bay Development Agency and several other community-related engagements and infrastructure provision to ensure inclusivity within the South African city. Debbie Hendricks, you have the space. Thank you.
Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, everybody. It's so good to speak to you this morning. Just bear with me as I just load my presentation. Yeah, this morning seemed like a technical difficulties day for everybody. Let me know if you can see that, everybody. Is that clear?
Yes, we can, Debbie. Maybe let's put it into presentation mode.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Thanks.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Debbie Hendricks. I'm based in Port Elizabeth, these days known as Gqeberha. We are situated on the southeast coast of South Africa, one of the 4 metros in the country. I work for the development agency, the Mandela Bay Development Agency, which is an entity that is owned by our local municipality. It's created as a special purpose vehicle for implementation of catalytic projects, special interventions on behalf of the municipality. So yeah, I'm an urban planner by profession. Got more than 20 years experience in the field. Most of that has been a little bit of time in the private sector, but mostly in the public sector in various planning offices. But in the last couple of years, more focused on urban renewal and project management, project implementation, and that's where I'm currently still based. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm going to try to be brief because I think a lot of similarities has emerged and has come up again that I'm not going to emphasize too much. But the talk really is around seeing communities as beneficiaries to actually engaging with them as partners. So if you allow me, I'll just share a few lessons from the field in terms of the work that we've been doing, and also what are the main thoughts that really stands out for me in the space that I find myself in the last couple of years. So what does the agency do? Like you heard in the little video, we are an urban renewal company, a project management company. To a large extent, historically, we have been focused as a building company, mostly infrastructural capital projects focused in the inner city of Port Elizabeth. Mostly catalytic projects. By catalytic projects, I mean those projects that have a real impact or an opportunity to actually have an economic spin-off impact across various fields. Also, we implement development in a multi-sectoral development approach in specific mandated areas where we actually cluster or crowd in different initiatives in a designated space to have a more impactful result. These would be infrastructure projects, it would be area-based management projects, it would be psychosocial interventions, arts and culture, etc. By area-based management, I mean not just construction and community engagement, but even engaging the community in issues of cleansing, maintenance, security, etc. Then we also manage a number of facilities, as well as community parks and public sites, etc. The last leg of what we do is in relation to applied partnerships, where we actually utilize the partnerships that we have with various non-government organizations, academic institutions, business, etc., to forge relationships to improve the way we do things, but also to pilot new ideas of methodologies around research and innovation in the development space. Those are just sort of a few pictures of projects that we have been involved in. This really depicts a number of initiatives across the city over the last year, over the last 17 years. And they relate to infrastructure projects. I think it's more than 300 million in total to date, but it's focusing on community assets, community development spaces, event spaces, inner city infrastructure, community theaters, recreational spaces, streetscapes in terms of community parks and play areas and things like that. So that's been the focus of what we do. But we've also found more recently, and it's maybe the last five to 6 years, that in terms of engagement with the community groupings that has emerged very strongly is that people do not necessarily translate those interventions, those capital infrastructure interventions as development. So the question, I think it was also asked earlier, is you actually have to do both. You cannot just do the infrastructure development. It has to be done in conjunction or hand in hand with community development initiatives where people participate, but there's actually investment in the community itself. Skills development, capacitation, facilitating of discussions and the voice of the community in the projects. But more importantly, also facilitating real benefit and partnership as part of development. So I'm not going to go into the definitions of co-production, but what is it that we mean when we say co-production? And I've tried to structure my thoughts around the different components of a typical planning, project planning and implementation cycle. So obviously, it cannot be, I mean, we as planners obviously tend to focus on the planning things, but you actually have to plan for the life cycle of the entire, whether it's an infrastructure or a project. You actually have to plan life cycle and not just the initial stages of concept development and the land planning aspects. And then you prepare the plan and it's handed over to somebody else to implement, and your responsibility stops there. So we are, as an agency, involved in both the planning, but also the implementation side of those plans. And we can clearly see often the disjuncture between the two. So if you allow me, I just want to stop with each of these points and maybe just talk about the two aspects of planning, which is the urban planning and the various town planning processes versus actual project planning and implementation. There needs to be a seamless fusion or interlinking of these processes. They are, to a large extent, quite disjointed. There's a disconnect between town and urban planning, as well as the realities on the ground. The plans are in place, but a lot of it never gets implemented. We've recently had some engagements with our National Treasury officials that are doing reviews of the cities. And our scorecard of the city was very clear that we are doing very, very well on planning. All the plans are in place, all the processes for these plans are in place, but very badly on actual implementation. So if you look back at plans that have been developed over the last couple of years, very little of those have been implemented. Also, it's very clear that we are over-legislated and over-planned. South Africa obviously credits itself as having some of the best legislation in the world around a lot of these things, but we fall short around the implementation of those things. The other thing that is clear to us from an implementation point of view is a lot of the planning legislation is outdated. I know there's, with the advent of SPLUMA still has a long way to go to prove itself, and there's a lot of debate out there as to, is it actually making the difference that it's sought to make. But there are other planning tools that are used at a local level. If I think in the municipality of Port Elizabeth, zoning schemes that are still dated 1984 are still in use. That doesn't talk to the realities of the day. So the community see that there is a disconnect between the planning office and the realities that they have to deal with. The other point is that it's often a perception that urban planning hampers development rather than enable development. There is an excessive focus on planning control versus strategic and development planning. An example of this is that with the old planning legislation, things like legislating development, I recently was involved in trying to help somebody to get a liquor license for a tavern in the townships. The legislation would say, you know, you can't have more than 30% of your property used as a tavern, which makes no sense because the property is so small that half the house, more than half the house, is the tavern. So that legislation is not practical, it's not based in reality, but yet that is the law that is set down for somebody that's trying to legalize a business that has no other form of income. And the government also promotes the notion of local economic development. But our legislation doesn't talk to that objective. And obviously, the public participation in the urban planning processes are often just a tick box exercise as a legal requirement, and the value of real meaningful engagement and a contribution to the development is not realized. On the project planning side of things, in this case, the collaboration and the co-production in the conceptual and the planning phases of the project is key, not just as a compliance requirement. That means that, you know, the community itself, we want to call them beneficiaries at this stage, because that's often how they are treated, but we have to move away from that sort of mindset to understand who the stakeholders are and what role and meaningful role that they can play. Often, you know, communities are seen as recipients of a service. And although we talk about partnerships, it's almost as if it's token partnerships. They are not real legitimate partners. There needs to be a mind shift from recipients or beneficiaries of services and facilities or services towards stewardship and ownership. The last one would be the reality that this co-production or partnerships with the various stakeholders really requires investment of time and effort, as well as funds during project planning. It's often overlooked by planners and funders. You need real time to implement community capacity buildings and trainings, also to build relationships and trust with the community. That takes time, that takes effort. We often forget about that when we plan our project life cycles. This is Singapi Street. It's one project that we've done in a township called New Brighton, where the idea of co-production was really at the heart of the project. It took twice as long as a normal project would have done, but the entire project from start to finish was planned and implemented together with the community. The children in the area, the women, the various youth groups, we got together on Saturdays, and they actually sat and, you know, with paint and crayons and stuff, and you know, on maps and things, made drawings and artwork, etc., of what they would like to see, and, you know, what colors things must be painted, and how they see certain areas, what sort of development they would like to see, etc. And in the design, etc., we insisted the designers, once it's been captured, go back to them and say, is this what you wanted to see? You know, so the kids were invested, they knew exactly what they were planned. Imagine the excitement when these things were then built. So it's not somebody else's park, it's their park. Even in construction, we insisted that construction not be undertaken by a main contractor, but completely by SMMEs. Our in-house managers would then manage them, but it was done 100% by SMMEs, or let me call it emerging micro enterprises, which is small businesses. In South Africa, we have this thing called SMMEs that is quite a talking point at the moment, because they are in the middle of the construction space, but they often dominate the space because there's a focus on construction as opposed to community partnerships and a balance with other stakeholders, not just the construction sector. So Singapi Street is an example of a co-produced project. Then implementation. So as the agency, we often take plans that have been done by municipal departments or whatever, and we actually relook at those plans, reconfigure them And when we engage with the community, we insist that it be done in a particular way. So we insist that communities participate and that they actually profit during project contribution and implementation. People don't want to talk about it, but that is exactly what it is. That is what business are there to do. And a lot of these things are then outsourced based on profit. But why does the beneficiaries not get a slice of the pie, if you like? So in terms of sweat equity, there's a lot the community can contribute to a community facility. If you do that, there's a sense of pride, achievement, legacy for families and communities around that. Also a sense of we can do it ourselves versus our government must provide for us. Community employment during construction and its subsequent operations. I've mentioned the issue of during construction implementation, there's a focus on the EMEs. The policy currently insists that a maximum of 30% value to be ring-fenced for EMEs. I mean, this has been the case for the last 10 years. Very little progress has been made to insist that there be more beneficiation for emerging contractors. And then because of that issue currently, there's a displaced focus from community benefit to where the SMMEs dominate the space versus other community stakeholders. In other words, people forget that the long-term benefit is actually the facility or the service, not just the construction jobs in the period of construction, which is temporary jobs. Yeah, and we make a lot of effort to shift the effort, shift the emphasis on that. Yeah, the other issue in terms of the learning is that community participation, active community participation is not institutionalized. And I mean, there's a lot we can say about this, but an example is we currently struggle as it's almost impossible for communities to participate in the delivery of goods and services because the municipality systems are subject to a competitive bidding system. So if you think an example would be, we have an area, we have a community patrols that are patrolling the areas at night for safety and so forth. It's impossible for us to pay them a little stipend because they're not a registered business. So the current procurement systems prefers or it favors business, and that you can actually not do you know, contract with community groupings to deliver certain services for themselves and get some financial reward for it or paid for it, really. That is an issue that I think our supply chain and procurement processes really need to relook at. Also, procurement processes currently doesn't favor unbundling. That's where you take a big project like we have in Singapore, and then break it up into so that small community groupings can benefit. So instead of one big contractor who is a grade 7, etc., and he's got, you know, the financial muscle to actually deliver a big project, is we want to see a system whereby you can actually break it up so that community groupings can actually benefit from small components on the project. A small contractor to plant the grass, another one to do the fence, another one to do the painting, etc. Because the local people don't have the capacity to do one big contract, but they've got skills and labor to do the smaller components. So that is something that if they could do that, it really adds to also them investing themselves in the project. It's in their area, it's done by them, and you have a better response afterwards in terms of looking after the asset, you know, building identity in the community around that because they are so invested in it. This is another example of what we've done here. This is in Helenvale, the community that we showed the video on. We built a local sports field there. And interestingly enough, PE is currently undergoing a scourge of vandalism. I suppose this is across the country, but it's been very bad in Port Elizabeth. All its public facilities like sports fields, community halls, etc., has been so badly vandalized, especially during COVID, where there's lockdown, there's not a lot of people around, these things are not in use. But the municipalities really struggled because they cannot provide physical security guards for every facility. And some of them have been stripped to the bone. We've had a public swimming pool that they've carried the pool, everything away, brick by brick. There's just a hole in the ground left. And then you ask yourself, but there's a surrounding community living opposite this thing. How can people see this and look the other way? And when you engage with them, is that there is a disconnect with themselves and that public facility. We go into our townships and it's never ever been so dirty. You try to understand what is this disassociation between, you know, you as a person and living in such a filthy environment. If you go into people's houses, it's super clean and super tidy. You step outside there and there's filth all over. And the response is very strange. They say, oh, government doesn't care, why must we care? Somebody actually said in one of these community dialogues that we've been having is, it's as if we are in a collective depression. We don't care. It's a strange thing because it's very, you know, psychological, and we don't actually talk about this in infrastructure development. But there seems to be a real disconnect between the public spaces and community spaces and the communities that they are meant to serve, and to the communities that are meant to enjoy them. That's why, if that was the case and they loved these spaces and it was meaningful to them, they would not allow for it to be vandalized. So we built that sort of thinking into the design of this. Interestingly, this space is slap bang in the middle of, I want to say, a no-go zone of 2 gang territories. And actually what we had to do is to engage them, even the gang bosses. Now, we were very clear, we don't engage with the gang bosses as gang bosses. We call a community meeting, and if your child is in a sports club, or your child plays soccer, or is at the local school, etc., everybody is welcome. And these guys actually set up their own structures to look after this facility. So there's no security guards, it's looked after by the municipality. There's a little house there at the back, if you can see in the corner, that's a caretaker's cottage. We insisted that somebody from the local area be appointed as the caretaker. The municipality wanted to run a recruitment process. Obviously, that's open for everybody. That would mean somebody from outside could also then get that job. The community said that's not going to happen. Even if they have to pay that person themselves, nobody else is going to look after the field. This center has been open for a year. It has not suffered any vandalism, any destruction. The community clubbed together for petrol to put in the lawnmowers to do that. And we've had, unlike other projects in the area, no stoppage due to gang violence around this project. So we believe that it points to a different way of doing things. And actually the difference between the community really looking after the infrastructure versus the municipality paying dearly at a high cost for private security, which is not sustainable. We cannot be having security stationed at every street corner, at every facility across the municipality. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but really it's not just during planning, it's also maintenance and operations. Focusing on specifically on the youth, I think. And as I said earlier, if you don't do that, we miss an opportunity for meaningful engagement. The youth are not participating enough in public discourse at this stage. They are not voting. There's an issue there that we as a society need to address if we're going to look at a prosperous future for our youth. And then the other thing of building a caring society. Yeah, this seems to be an abstract notion, but I think when it comes to facilities and planning, it really is a representation of what's happening in our society. We have to start building a culture of caring for one's neighbor, for one's environment, etc. And that has to be part of the capacity building, part of the training when we engage with communities around this. And then obviously budgeting. I think Dr. Otters mentioned this thing of co-production in budgeting as well, and financial planning. And often the maintenance and operations is a forgotten aspect around this. We tend to want to focus on capital projects and not on maintenance and operations. We do some funding applications for various projects as well. It is much easier to get funds for capital projects. Nobody wants to fund maintenance and operations. It's a huge weakness in our funding structures that we have to look at. You know, it's the politicians like capital projects because we can cut ribbons in front of capital projects. We can't cut ribbons on maintenance and operation investments. So that is a mind shift that I think we have to talk about how we structure these things. Also monitoring and evaluation. I think the communities, if you see them as real partners, should actually participate in the evaluation of projects in progress. It's, you know, we do Auditor General reports, we do these performance assessments, etc. They would probably look very different if the communities that benefit from these areas had to have input in the performance assessment of politicians and officials, because the real impact are measured by them and not how we articulate and structure our performance targets. It's very easy to manipulate those things. And you know, there's an obsession with clean audits. You can have a clean audit in terms of governance, all very good, and have not done a thing of meaning. So that's another one. Yeah, and then there has to be better systems established for communities to meaningfully report into the plans for maintenance and operations. So the plans for the area-based plan specifically focuses on that, but we only insist on an IDP level on planning of projects and not budgets and planning mechanism and processes for area-based management or community development plans. So lastly, what do communities bring to the table? You cannot dispute the fact that the local knowledge and insights that they have, an outside technician or outside professional wouldn't be able to bring that. That would make for better planning, better outcomes, better solutions for local problems. I spoke about a sense of ownership and care. We have to ask ourselves why things are the way they are. And I think there's a lot to be said that people are not invested in the areas that they are. In South Africa, we do have this disparity in our spatial planning layout of our areas with apartheid planning. And I think there's a lot of anger and resentment that you still see around how people feel about their areas because of the racial structure of the city. That's still very evident. And I think there's a big connection between that and improving security and surveillance in areas. Sustainability, it will make for better designs and more cost-effective solutions if we partner with community as legitimate partners. And also, bring the balance whereby it's the community is another partner that carries the burden of the city, not just for government to deliver. Because I think we all have to realize that it becomes an overwhelming, impossible task, and that communities really need to step up as far as that's concerned. And then their labor, we don't do enough for community themselves to bring their sweat equity to a development area. And then, in South Africa, we have a huge issue with unemployment. It's important that we have systems and processes in place to get our people back to work for obviously the economy, but to improve livelihoods and to improve the outlook for our cities and our towns. Colleagues, thank you very much. That's a few thoughts I wanted to leave with you. Sorry, I still struggle with my breathing post-COVID, so I had my my chest tightening up from time to time. I'm sorry. I hope I could make sense. I forget how tiring it can be.
Thank you very much, Debbie, for this wonderful presentation. We do appreciate you for coming, even with the challenge that you have gone through. Thank you so much for making it up to this time. We really appreciate that. Great. Colleagues, we're on to our first presentation, and this is going to be from Professor Anna Du Plessis, and she will be presenting to us now. Prof, you have the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam, also to Kayla and everyone present. Just before I start, I happen to have very weak internet signal at the moment, for which I apologize. So let's see how it goes. I'm going to try and be quick, but if at any point someone can't hear me well, just indicate as such, and I will perhaps switch off my video. Kayla, could you just confirm that my slides are visible?
Yes, they are, Anel, and if you can put it in presentation mode, that would be even better.
There we go.
Thank you.
So thank you again to you guys, but certainly also to the three previous speakers and Debbie in particular, which so clearly articulated the experience in practice and the importance in practice of co-production for sustainable infrastructure, specifically in South Africa. And I will also be speaking to the South African context. Unfortunately, with far less exciting examples than what Debbie had. My name is Anel Du Plessis, and I am a legal scholar situated at the Northwest University at the Sarchiche, like you've heard with the introduction section earlier this morning. And I will be looking specifically into the issue of legal frameworks being part of the overall structural design that we have for co-production. And before I get into what the law provides for, and I have from a theoretical perspective a slightly more positive experience than what Debbie has in practice, and I think that's something important that we need to acknowledge. But before I get there, I will stand still with what I call the maze of concepts. If you consider the theme of our panel this morning afternoon, there's four prominent or three prominent concepts. And the first is institutional frameworks, which I regard legal frameworks to be part of. And then we talk about co-production and sustainable infrastructure. And these are loaded concepts, which I thought it's important for me to just briefly unpack before I get to the legal framework and how I see that befitting the idea of co-production. So institutional frameworks can be defined as a set of formal organizational structures, rules, but it's also including informal norms and guidelines. And I think especially for us living and working in the global South, it's important to recognize the importance also of informality in understanding institutional frameworks. We've got the written law, but often there is a law in operation in informal settlements, among informal trade sectors, etc. And those definitely also form part of the overall institutional framework. And these frameworks shape activity and human behavior. And therefore, I think that the theme of the conference these 2 days is particularly important because we don't spend enough time understanding how institutional frameworks block or enable. We talk about legal frameworks, they form part of the institutional frameworks, and it really speaks to the body of law within a country or within a sector that applies to governance. So in South Africa, when we look at the formal law, excluding the informal law that I just referred to, we've got the Constitution. It's a pre or post-apartheid constitution. It's new relative to many other countries in the world. But we also have a system of common law, statutory law, legislation. with its regulations. We've got jurisprudence, the judgments of the courts, and legally binding other instruments such as contracts and agreements, and some of those instruments Debbie also referred to earlier. And then co-production, I would also like to stand still with, and some of the other presenters did as well. So for me, co speaks to the who in this concept. It's obviously state actors, municipalities, including both councillors and the administration. But then it's what you can call lay actors, but it's not so lay in the true sense of the word. And that is people in the community. It's the private sector. It's people without public power necessarily, and institutions without public power. And then production can be described as 4 stages in the cycle of public services. And for me personally, this is quite a relevant and revealing unpacking of production in co-production. It speaks to co-commissioning. And you can read the description there on the screen. It also speaks to co-design, and I think that often we misinterpret co-production to be co-design. It's much more than that. And many of the examples that we heard this morning explains that it's more than co-design. It's also about co-delivery, typically where there's partnerships for delivery between a municipality and local community associations or groups, like we've heard in the Eastern Cape example just now. And then lastly, co-assessment. And I think this is the stage in the cycle of public services that receives the least attention, where we should jointly monitor and evaluate public services as part of different processes, be it IDP processes or any others. But assessment is not only to be done by municipalities, by cities, by the Auditor General, etc. It's to be done in collaboration with communities. Sustainable infrastructure, every one of us here this afternoon knows what this sustainability in this context refers to, and definitely also infrastructure. It's those structural elements keeping our towns and cities standing, and sustainability speaks to that balance between the economic, social, environmental, and also cultural dimensions of infrastructure over its entire life cycle. And UNEP has done quite a bit of work on this concept of sustainable infrastructure in the urban context. So in South Africa, we've got plenty of law. And Debbie said also, and rightly so, that local government is over-regulated and over-legislated. And I think to agree with her to a large degree. This maze of South African law, specifically here on the screen, you see the legislative outline. It's the Constitution, it's local government legislation that applies, it's spatial planning legislation that applies, environmental legislation, administrative law, municipal bylaws, and then also case law. But we also got policy. And when we talk about co-production, the 2 policies that are probably the most relevant are the white paper on local government and the national policy framework for public participation. In the Constitution, when we look at co-production, I think it is important that we realize when we talk about sustainable infrastructure, plenty of substantive rights in our Bill of Rights apply. These range from housing rights, water rights, the environmental right, property rights. There are also procedural rights, and these may be particularly important for co-production in the sense that we should remember that at least in South Africa, everyone has the right of access to information, but not access to just administrative action, which speaks to the way in which all organs of state, including municipalities, are supposed to take their decisions when it affects the community. And one of the elements of just administrative action speaks to the right to be heard and the right to be involved in decisions affecting your life. Chapter 7 of our Constitution is devoted to all issues local government, and Section 152 is regarded as the mother of the public participation provisions in the Constitution, saying that municipalities must govern with communities on board. That's obviously the more informal language, but that is what it boils down to. And then chapter 3 speaks to cooperative government. And I think we should not, when we talk about co-production, forget how important it is also for the different spheres, and for those not from South Africa, the different levels of government to collaborate in the delivery of sustainable infrastructure. We tend, when we talk about co-production, to speak a lot about the relationship between communities and municipalities or cities. But there's also something to be said for the relationship between municipalities, cities, and other organs of state. In our context, there's a lot of dependencies for the delivery of sustainable infrastructure. And then lastly, on the Constitution, chapter 10 provides for values and principles governing our public administration. And one of those principles speak to involving people in how public services are delivered. So it's a very explicit provision in our Constitution. Then, for those not from South Africa, we've got plenty of local government legislation, legislative instruments at the national level that applies to all municipalities. 3 of those you see the names of on the screen. The Systems Act, for example, has an entire chapter on public participation. And those provisions in that chapter typically provides for co-production mechanisms. I would say that it can be limited if you, as a municipality, think that those are the only mechanisms, but at least it gives us an indication as to how municipalities can better involve community members. The Municipal Structures Act replete with examples also of how communities can be involved in the structures of municipalities by way of being involved in communities, not communities, committees, for example, forums, and other instruments of that kind. And then the MFMA, the Municipal Finance Management Act, specifically makes provision for the involvement of communities in the budgeting processes of municipalities. And when we talk about co-production for sustainable infrastructure, it's for me personally important to understand the interaction between, for example, an integrated development plan, the SDBIP, the budget, and later on also the performance management system of a municipality. These governance instruments all work together, and you need the involvement of non-municipal entities and people in all those instruments. The spatial planning and environmental legislation, you heard Debbie say that our planning legislation falls short in some instances. It merits, however, to mention that since 2013, we've got the Spatial Planning and Land Use Management Act, which is the key national act for spatial planning in South Africa at the moment. It's complemented by the National Environmental Management Act, the Water Services Act, National Water Act, National Building Regulations Act, and those in combination has a bearing on spatial planning practices in municipalities. But each of these laws have at least one provision on the importance of involving community members in the processes, instruments, and the authorization mechanisms that these acts provide for. Then we've got administrative law. It's overarching. It's not only applicable to municipalities and certainly not only applicable to planning. We've got the Promotion of Access to Information Act and the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act. And these in combination speaks to fair decision making. And fair is not only speaking to decisions excluding people, but it also, in my view, speaks to how especially officials should see their duty to take decisions in an inclusive way. It's about involving people from the start, from inception. You don't want to lose your people down the way because they feel that they've been excluded in the beginning and only become part of textbook tick box exercises in ticking off public participation and meeting requirements, for example. then it was very interesting for me when I looked at a few municipal bylaws for examples of where provision is made for public participation, and I deliberately didn't look at some of our metropolitan municipalities. I looked at smaller municipalities' bylaws. And it seems as if there's definitely an uptake also by municipalities themselves in different bylaws to also provide for the participation of their local communities. And three of the examples that you see here on the screen is the Mzunduzi Municipality Spatial Planning and Land Use Management Bylaw, Mfuleni's Local Municipality Solid Waste Management Bylaw, and the Mobela bylaws for the establishment of its City Improvement District, its CIDs. And all of these bylaws put a responsibility on the municipality, the council and the officials in these sectors to engage meaningfully with local communities. The Constitutional Court, but also our higher courts in the country, often had to deal with the issue of communities having been excluded from decision-making processes. So it's specifically the decision-making processes, not so much the implementation thereof. But I suppose that's usually where the problem starts, when decisions are taken without municipalities without communities on board. And there you see a couple of the cases that have been decided before the Constitutional Court specifically. So I don't want this to come across too optimistically, but I think that in South Africa, it's fair to say that we've got an amazingly, pardon the pun, enabling legal framework for co-production. It is very enabling. And that is speaking to the letter of the law itself. Implementation and enforcement is also part of the story, but I'm not looking into that in any detail today. So I've taken some extracts from those laws and cases that I just referred to, just to show the way in which they provide for public participation. We see that Judge Albie Sachs, or then Judge Albie Sachs, in the Residence of Joe Slovo case, for example, said that the authorities responsible for housing must have a wide discretion in respect of how they should best manage programs that are eminently reasonable in their objectives. At the same time, they must deal with the people most affected in a fair manner that invites their participation and that respects their dignity. And for me, dignity is an important facet of how we involve people. Do we bring our case? Do we bring our project? Do we bring our plan? Or are we going, or do we embark on the journey with everybody on board from the very beginning, as opposed to this bringing idea? The Municipal Systems Act says that when establishing mechanisms, processes, and procedures for public participation, the municipality must take into account the special needs of people who cannot read or write, people with disabilities, women, and other disadvantaged groups, which I think also speaks to sometimes differentiating in co-production. Co-production can never become a one-size-fits-all. And we also need to recognize that even when we speak about the community versus the municipality and joining their forces, knowledge and insights in project conceptualization, implementation, etc., there might be very well a need for differentiation at different levels, not only at the levels suggested here in the Systems Act. Still with the Systems Act, on the right-hand side, a municipality must develop a culture of municipal governance that complements formal representative government, the system of participatory governance, not only representative governance. Because in a democracy, we should always remember that we have representative democracy, but that should be complemented with participatory democracy. The Mfuleni Waste Management Bylaw says that the bylaws promote participation of all municipal residents in the promotion of responsible citizenship by ensuring sound waste management practices within residential and industrial environments. And then here, the mother principle here at the bottom, the object of local community organizations in the matters of local government. And it's on this provision, section 152 of the Constitution, that the courts often rely. So some of the mechanisms and actors that we find in the legislation that I think can be useful for co-production is our ward committees, our ward forums, stakeholder forums, community complaints management systems. The legislation also provides for meetings, public participation, engagements. I think those have limited value, but that's other mechanisms that's also provided for. Written comment procedures, for example, when a municipality develops a new bylaw, there's an opportunity to submit written comments and so on. And then some of the key actors in the municipality that I think are supposed to be the champions when it gets to co-production is our mayors, our ward councillors, but certainly also community development workers. They might be slightly more approachable also. So how do I think the law can work for co-production towards sustainable infrastructure? I think it is important that not only those working in and for municipalities, but also the lesser mortals like myself in the community, that we know the law, that we know where we are entitled to formally participate, but that we also know how the provisions for participation have been judicially interpreted, because sometimes the law can be vague, it can be daunting. So knowledge of the law is key, and capacity building in that regard. And as I said, it does not only apply to municipalities, but also to members in the community. We should also appreciate what legal frameworks within institutional frameworks can and cannot do. The law can solve very little real-life problems, in my view, but the instruments it provides for can be very meaningfully developed, especially by our authorities. We should remember that legal frameworks are quiet on informality, quiet on lockdowns, quiet on economic crises, gender and age biases, etc. The law also does not implement nor enforce itself, its people. It's also confined to boundaries in spite of global borderless environmental and climate risks and risks to infrastructure. And I also think that on the third point there, that we don't often enough question and debate the addressees of the law. So when the law says that communities must be involved in decision making, who are the ones that should involve them? And I think that when we imagine how infrastructure in our cities come about, there's also something to be said for the responsibilities on the part of investors, the service delivery agents that municipalities use, CBOs, NGOs, economic partners. All of these people should take on board the idea of co-production. We should also harness the municipal governing power that exists in South Africa. I think municipalities got a huge leeway to make the best of the mechanisms available in law for co-production. I think we don't often talk about how much power municipalities in South Africa actually have. There are very few countries in the world where municipalities are enabled and can do so much as is the case in South Africa after the adoption of the 1996 Constitution. But it asks for innovation, and it asks for the pushing of boundaries of power, sometimes vis-a-vis the power of provincial and national governments even. I also think that we should understand rights versus duties. It's not only a right to participate, and I try and talk about this, especially in informal engagements, as much as I can. It's also a duty to participate. I think the responsibility of citizens is sometimes underplayed. We focus so much on the rights that we don't necessarily see the concomitant duties in order to make the rights framework work well. We should also guard against using the enabling law only in relation to co-commissioning and co-design. We should use the law also, as I said in the beginning, for co-delivery and co-assessment. And then lastly, it's my suggestion and view, at least, that we should use legal principles, of which we've got many in South Africa, and legal values to guide the application of legal rules. And these principles and values speak to human dignity, non-racialism, non-sexism, the rule of law, spatial justice, spatial resilience, and one can add several others to that list. So I thank you very much for having listened to this brief overview of how I deem South African law to be enabling when we start talking about ways to achieve co-production. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof, for this wonderful presentation. On this note, I'll bring to close our 4 presentations, and I'll hand over to Kayla, who is going to take the question and answer session. I see some questions have actually come in the chat section. And if there's any other person who still have questions that you have questions that you need to put across, you can raise your hand if you need to speak or type in the chat section. Kayla, please, I hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Sam. I have to admit, I'm also now another victim of stage 4 emergency load shedding, which basically for our international guests is like really bad electricity outages that we're experiencing at the moment. But I'm still here and I'm connected. I'm watching my battery whittling away, but I'm going to try to stay with you. And I see Sam is also now connecting via his phone. I know Anel is also having connection issues. So we really, we fighting against all odds here, but let's keep going while we can. Incredible presentation. Thank you so much. Sam, I'm just going to mute you quickly. I'm getting some feedback. There we go. And I think the order was also so wonderful, you know, starting with Catalina and getting some definitions, getting some international cases of incredible work, Sierra Leone, different projects, and understanding the role of the academic institution in co-production, which is super interesting. And then from Dr. Kasim, the context of disaster and seeing disaster as an opportunity to kind of recalibrate how we do planning and bring in communities into the planning process through a kind of context of disaster, and even defining community in the context of disaster as a group of people who might experience the same kinds of risks. And then going to Debbie and getting some very real, tangible examples of what co-production might look like, and the very real tensions that Catalina was also picking up on in her presentation, the tensions that play out and the conflict, and how you know, these things often can't be planned for, and the need to be agile and the need to adapt to different kind of contexts when you do your planning. And also, Debbie, I think you're pushing us to think of the concept of beneficiaries, and problematizing that word is also very interesting in the context of co-production. And thank you also for bringing in the aspect of the psychological experience and touching on issues of well-being, and how instrumental that is to co-production and taking ownership of one's space. And now it's always great to bring in the legal perspective, and I think it's quite a refreshing, different lens. And I think you always kind of bring in that reminder that the legal framework is actually incredibly enabling. And if it's perceived as not being enabling, then perhaps it's in the perceptions and the interpretations of the framework. But the legal framework as it currently exists actually is incredibly enabling. So then perhaps it's more about, you know, the culture of the organization in how we read that framework. But I think let's bring in some questions. So Musa, you've asked 2 really good questions. If you're able to, could you unmute and ask your 2 questions so that we can actually get a physical discussion going. I know I'm putting you on the spot, Namusa.
You
We
are.
are able to unmute. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. But basically, what I was asking is that most of the presentations have spoken about the concept of empowering the co-producers, and often that it needs a lot of money, it needs a lot of funding, and the assumption is that planners possess those skills already. And the second leg of my question was then on monitoring and evaluation, to say there's so much talk of empowerment, but there isn't much talk about monitoring and evaluation. And is there a need for a body to actually set the terms of reference for how co-production should happen between the government and local communities? So the one is a comment, and the second part is more of a question. Yeah, and then the second question was for Debbie. Her presentation spoke about sweat equity as one of the tools for co-production. So I was just interested in finding out whether they use community members that already possess certain skills in the implementation of their projects, or whether the process is open to any member of the community who wishes to contribute to that project, and whether in cases where they've used ordinary community members, has that led to ripple effects where people have then used the skills that they've attained during that process to maybe advance themselves, to start businesses or any other improvements? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Namusa, and apologies for putting you on the spot. But it's just nice to hear different voices. So I think those are 2 really nice questions. Let's start by taking those. So Catalina, if you could answer the first one, and then we'll go to Debbie.
Sure, yeah, thanks for the question. I think there's an idea also, in a preconception, is that the local planners are already, let's say, trained in co-production, and the ones that need to be, educated somehow are the communities. And I think when we are talking about, in a way, shifting the paradigm towards co-production, we need to acknowledge the fact that we all need to learn. So somehow it's a new framework for doing things and framing things. And I think Debbie was rightly pointing out that this idea is a mind shift, and a mind shift of who does what somehow. But acknowledging the stress and also the very complicated conditions that everyone is, local states are struggling. I mean, everyone is struggling, and particularly now, I'm glad that we also brought to the table the idea of caring. And I think you cannot have, let's say, a culture of co-production if you don't have in place a culture of care. And I think that is, we still have a long way to go. And I think that is precisely what we need to co-learn to be meaningful in each one of the places and in each one of the conditions. So these terms of reference for sure need to exist, but need to be drafted by all the parties. And that's why I think the role of universities, NGOs, and different organizations becomes very handy, kind of being the brokers, perhaps, of these connections and these bridges that needs to be built. So the main infrastructure that needs to be built for tackling and installing a culture of co-production is precisely the infrastructure of people, right? And Simone have talked about that already, about thinking people as infrastructure, and the infrastructure for co-learning and defining those terms of reference, if you will, is kind of one of the stepping stones for creating this paradigm shift.
Thank you so much. And I think that when you talk about the culture of care, I think, you know, we see that so much in the work that Debbie presented already. But over to you, Debbie.
Yeah, Namusa, your question about sweat equity. No, absolutely. It's not limited to physical labor, to the construction section of what we do. At the start of the project, we had something called a social compact agreement with the municipality, with the local municipal stakeholders, but also with the community. And part of that was for people to actually bring their assets to the table. So we had long engagements of, but what do we have in the community that are assets? What are their strengths? What are the skills in the community? So the construction sectors obviously was fairly obvious, but part of capacity building was helping a builder or a plumber or somebody that has some skills, is maybe worked as a laborer all his life for a construction company, is how do you help him to set up his own little business and register his own SMME company? And we invest a lot of time and effort in training those people how to tender, how to participate, how to actually, how to set up a health and safety file, how to work out a bill of quantities, so that you bring them to a point of developing them to be active participants, because otherwise they don't have the wherewithal to actually engage and to benefit in terms of how we actually set it out. So a lot of time and investment to bring that up to the point where they can actually fully participate. But it's not just limited to the construction sector, as I said. There were other skills. There was social workers. There were people that had extensive counseling training that we assisted with. There were sports coaches. So, I mean, we built a sports field, but it was actually developing the local sports clubs with coaching training, with kit, etc. And there was a lot of opportunities for small businesses around that. So the agency made a bit of effort to assist those structures to formalize as NGOs, some of them as NPOs. We have something called the Helenville Center of Hope, which is a youth leadership academy. So it's individuals then emerge there, or they've managed to start their own business, or a little co-op, or an SMME, whether it's a construction company, or actually a non-profit organization that looks after cases involving gender-based violence, like overnight places of safety, etc. So we've actually trained people to be offering those sort of services, and they now get a little stipend from the Department of Social Development, etc. So definitely not sweat equity is what can you bring with what you can do with your hands or your skills, and how can we actually capitalize that in the project, that as a meaningful contribution to the project. So yes, there's lots of possibilities around sweat equity and bringing that as a tool for co-production that we've engaged in.
Thanks, Debbie. I think that's a really interesting kind of, not framework, but another mechanism for co-production that, I don't think we thought about when kind of planning this webinar and thinking through some of the frameworks that do exist. We were kind of focusing on the legal, the policy frameworks. But I think what you've brought to this discussion is just a reminder about how you spend your budget as being so important to the co-production agenda. And I know we were talking a little bit, or Catalina mentioned it earlier, participatory budgeting. And Debbie, maybe you can just explain what that is, and if you use that as a tool in your processes. Oh, sorry, and you're on mute, Debbie.
You see my mouth moving. Yeah, so we get a budget from the municipality, but we also have funding from external funders. So the budget of the municipality goes through the normal IDP process, although we do a little bit more of, not a lot, in fact, a lot more intensive engagements around what municipal budget allocation that community has, so that they don't just come to a meeting and say, oh, but we want more lights, or we want a park, or just a wish list that they hope eventually gets factored into a municipal plan. We actually design a plan, multi-year plan, to say, you actually have to think about it. Don't put a million, if the ward gets a budget of 20 million rand, don't put a plan for 20 million rand in this year, because a project actually takes 3 years to design. You need to get permissions, you need plans in place, etc. So you have to design the project over 3 years, which means the spending of that million rand probably not going to happen in the first year. It's probably going to be started in the second year. How long does procurement take? People have a sense that we go like to a shop and buy an item and it can be there tomorrow. So that you manage expectations that it's not going to be overnight and it's not going to be quick, because these things take time. And so if the community is part of designing a process plan for a project that details the outline, the steps, and the time allocated for each step, they have a better sense of what realistically to expect, and then to make certain decisions and trade-offs. Okay, so but what is the priority this year for us? Let's do this one now, and this one maybe next year, etc. So you create a space where there's an understanding about budgeting processes, about project management processes as well, what happens where, and also at what point do we agree that they are going to be consulted at. And if there's a problem, I think somebody's actually said it, you have to go back and keep on communicating. The communication strategy around a project is as important. So how are we going to keep each other informed? We've had lots of tough lessons where the learning curve was steep in areas like Helenvale, because often when things don't go to plan, government tends to keep quiet. And they wait until the tires are burning in the street, where they have to come and account as to why things haven't happened, etc., like that. So even if it's bad news, communicate the bad news. If there's delays, communicate the delays. So when it comes to budgeting also, if there's budget cuts, the municipality just cut our budget. You have to go back to the community and explain that has happened, and this will mean this for this particular project. And they must then help decide what it is that we can do, what it is that they're willing to accept or not willing to accept. So we do that for IDP, but also especially with our international funders, as part of actually creating a business plan for the project, in terms of what things cost, things like you don't take, you almost take for granted that the community wouldn't be interested, but to them, they want to know what percentage the consultant gets. And we don't want to talk about that, because it's their money, or the consultants don't want to say how much they are getting, but it's come off the project cost. The community has an expectation of 50 million, they're going to get a value of 50 million, but they need to understand there are costs there that is not, that are supporting costs, or it's for studies, or it's for consultants and things like that. So I think the whole thing of delivering a project for a community is a misnomer as far as co-production is concerned. You have to bring them on board and have them make real meaningful choices. So it's not just feeding with information, it's actually engaging so that you can actually come to a joint decision around certain things. It's not easy. It does take longer. There's a lot of conflict often, there's a lot of trade-offs and some horse trading at times, but it does make for a better outcome. It does make for more secure and more sustainable outcomes and better solutions. So rather invest some time with that at the start, then have a project that is stuck midway, that is stuck for years because of disputes, etc. So So absolutely, the participatory budgetary is, but I think it's something we all could do better at. And I think we need a bit of training around how do we package that information, because obviously it's very financial information. It can be quite technical. It can be, quite high level and not accessible to all. And we have to think about simplifying the telling of that story and how do we depict information truthfully.
Thank you, Debbie, for such a comprehensive answer. And I know you are, I'm so sorry that we've dragged you into this. I know you are still recovering from COVID, but it's just so useful to have your knowledge and expertise here to share, these real life experiences. And I see the conversation is now going in the direction of the importance of communication. And this is something that came out quite strongly in Dr. Kasim's presentation, where he really explained, the importance of standard messaging, consistent messaging. And I think that's so much where, the trust deficit can come from if there isn't that consistent communication. And as you say, Debbie, even if things are not going right, to communicate that rather than kind of let it come out at a later point when it's too late. But I see Melandri has put a really nice question in the chat. I see it's for Debbie and Anel, but let's give this one to Anel and let Debbie catch her breath. Melandri, do you want to ask your question into the room? It would be really nice to get more voices in. If you can't, that's also okay. Okay, I'm going to read the comment on the chat then, just so that we can all hear it. So she says, thank you for the wonderful, insightful presentations from all the panelists. Departing from a point highlighted in Prof. du Plessis' discussion, my question goes to Prof. du Plessis and Debbie. It seems that we can assume that co-production would also include positive duties on the communities themselves, thus moving beyond the community just being consumers or only receiving the services, but instead becoming more actively involved. We accept that rights are accompanied by corresponding responsibilities, but this is barely acknowledged by the addressees of these rights. So how can we make the idea of co-production more attractive in that regard, and how might the law facilitate that? It's a really nice question, and I think Anel started to touch on it, but Anel, maybe you want to elaborate a little bit more.
Thank you, Kayla, and thank you also to Melandri for the question, which I would like to answer by starting to ask what discouraged people from participating. And I think the conversation that we've had just now is alluding to that, the consistency, the continuous involvement of people and building a trust relationship over time. I think when people become disillusioned with participatory processes, they simply stay away in future because nobody really have time to waste nowadays. And people want to feel that they are heard. And the moment they feel that their inputs are not being taken into consideration or just do not generate a response, you run the risk of not seeing them again, not hearing them again. So I really think we should focus on building trust relationships. And I fully agree, the message need not only always be positive and good news, and sometimes it will be bad news, but at least the channel of communication remains open consistently. And I fully agree also with that language issue. The literal and figurative language should be accessible for the recipients. So that would be my take on that question. And as far as the law is concerned, the law can't change people's minds. It can regulate behavior. So I think on this one, we should not rely too much on the content of the law, but rather on behavior and the relationship between municipalities and communities.
Thanks so much, Anel. Yeah, always fascinated by your interpretation of how law can be used. There's a really nice question from Kulekani in the chat. Kulekani, please can I invite you into the room to ask your question? It's so interesting. If you're able to unmute, please do. There you are. And of course, turn on your video. We do want to see you.
Good morning, everyone. All protocols observed. I'm working for a municipality, so I always make sure that I say that because we need to say it. If we're working for a municipality, to observe all protocols, otherwise we'll be fired. Thank you very much for the presentations and the opportunity to be in this platform. It concerns a lot when you are in the space where you need every stakeholder to be on board, especially the owners of resources are very invisible. If you can ask me who are they, who am I referring to, I may not be able to say because maybe protecting myself from exposing who am I talking about. But I'm feeling that they only are interested in investment, and as planners, we are interested in development. So if you don't talk profit to them, you're talking community development, you're talking stakeholder relations, that's not their concern. Their concern is how they make more profit. And if the system is making more profit for them, then it's not necessary for them to change the system. So now it becomes difficult now in the community development to say, because the people that are developing might not necessarily have resources. That is why maybe in KwaZulu-Natal, they were talking about people developing their small businesses. So now, do they have resources to start their own businesses? Do they have finances to start to have capital for development? They might have ideas, they might have business opportunities, but now they don't have the resources. Might be very expensive because the owners also determine the price. So it becomes a little bit of a struggle. So I wonder what methods or what can we do in order to call them on board and give them confidence that they will always own the resources, but let us reason together. So those platforms of reasoning together, I think they are very important in planning. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And, you know, I don't work for a municipality, so I don't have to say all protocols observed. And I promise we won't tell your bosses if you don't say it either. Catalina, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I think that is like a very substantial and important question, because I think it's kind of the elephant in the room, right? Because in a way, the ones that oftentimes have more power are not interested in changing the paradigm. And that's why I started partly my talk saying that this is a political project and we cannot depoliticize a discussion on co-production. And I see co-production as a political project that goes beyond party politics. I see it as a political project that understands politics in the wider sense of contributing to the public good in a way. And I think something that is important and needs to be kind of a cornerstone of course of planning is how can we devise the mechanisms for actually enabling the co-responsibility of the production of the city, but particularly the interdependence we have. And I think in one of the key words during the pandemic is the idea of interdependence. And I think, yes, a lot of actors, powerful actors, are driven by profit, but they are also not benefiting or badly impacted if things don't go well either. So even you can have more profit if you have a better project or a place that is more fully, it has more sense of belonging and it has more security and all these things. So I think Something that is particularly in my experience in Colombia that we have a very interesting trajectory in bringing about spatial planning is one of the constitutional principles about the redistribution of the costs and the benefits of the urbanization process. So the law and I think the regulatory system also need to push for these redistributive moves. So for instance, if you are doing a real estate development, you need a percentage of social housing. You need a percentage of certain percentages or areas for public infrastructure, public space. If there are, depending upon the scale of the project, some of the projects contribute to a general fund to sponsor, let's say, public spaces somewhere else in the city that it's on deficit. All this transfer of development rights of the cities, of the areas of the city that cannot be developed, but can be built somewhere else. So all these tools and mechanisms that have been explored in many places are also part of the strategies to make more mandatory this kind of fair share, particularly for the ones that are either owning the land or owning all the real estate development agencies that usually they are the ones that benefit the most of not or are being driven by profit. But definitely in the case of Freetown, for instance, I think the leadership of the mayor has been also pivotal in bringing these powerful actors to the table, because usually the powerful don't do participation, they do negotiation. And I think that's why we need to move away from participation to negotiation, because all the deals happen not necessarily transparently and off the table. And I think is part of the social mobilization of a political project that demand transparency to also bring these powerful people. But partly of what I consider the pedagogical mission of planners is also trying to identify what are the benefits of bringing people together and the benefits to profit even. And I think that it's something that we still need to learn. And that's why, for instance, tools as storytelling, that I share some information there in the chat, could be part of how we start bringing different terms for persuading these different actors. But I think it takes more than a planner, and it needs to be part of a broader political project and a social mobilization element of it. Otherwise, it's very difficult to gain traction. So I think that's one of the main challenges we have in that regard. It cannot be depoliticized, this process.
Thank you, Catalina, and thank you, Kolekane, for raising that elephant in the room, which I think is so important and is very difficult. It's precisely the role of the frameworks, but it's also so challenging to kind of to implement in the face of power imbalances, and to shape the kind of organizational culture that might fight against current the current status quo, which continues to give power to those with the most financial means. I'm seeing other things coming into the chat. Silmari, implementation is the only proof for the community that they have been heard. I think that's such a nice kind of quote that we can remember. And I think it speaks to what everyone has been presenting today. And that just a reminder that we do have such wonderful policies and structures, but the battle is often in the implementation. And I think Debbie was touching on that today, despite showing the incredible implementation they have been doing in Nelson Mandela Bay. Maybe we can just end. I know it is after 2, and we did want to be wrapping up by 2. So maybe let's just bring in Dr. Kasim at this point for any kind of final thoughts and reflections. Then we will go to Anel, and then Debbie, and then end with Catalina, if that's okay. Just a one sentence kind of reflection, and then Sam can take us to closure. So Dr. Kasim, if you are still here. I know there have been connection issues on his side as well. Okay, never mind. Let's go to Anel for final reflections.
Thank you, Kayla. I think by saying that today illustrated to me how important research in this field is incredibly important, and emphasis on co-production being a political project, different disciplines. And then for the practitioners in the room, I think it's been a wake-up call in the sense that you realize that you are also people in power, but it's in a positive way, and that all of us being professionals in one way or the other are also members of the community, and that we should understand our rights and duties within.
Okay, we've lost Anel now. I'm so sorry, Anel, but I think we got most of it. I certainly heard most of it. Dr. Kasim, you are back. If you want to share any final reflections. Dr. Kasim, please go ahead if you can hear us. Okay, we're not hearing you. Let's go over to Debbie for final reflections.
Yeah, so much has been said. Of a final reflection is not an easy one, but maybe to share what my impression or my feeling that I have as we close the session. As planners, I think the role as facilitators and integrators and bringing the story together, I think we cannot underestimate that role. I lead a multidisciplinary team. There's an engineer, there's an architect, there's a QS, a construction manager, there's a social facilitator, etc. And as an urban planner, I'm able to bring those things together. It's not easy, but it is a very important job to have a suite of services or an integrated approach that I find is in terms of feedback from my team is very, very helpful. And I don't think we do enough of that in the implementation space. There's not enough planners in the implementation space. We have planners in planning control and in forward planning, like strategic or STF, LSTF's precinct plans, but not enough planners in the implementation. There is a real gap there, and I think it's a space that we shouldn't abdicate for other disciplines. It's something that I think planners have a particular strength in, that we have to step into and to claim our space. That's what I'm acutely aware of in this session. And then I think the last thing is that, as planners is a lot of the planners seem to be disconnected from reality. It feels like we need to come out of our offices a little bit and get our hands and our feet dirty, if I can be so bold as to say that. I am now an implementer, so half my struggle is to, fighting with my previous colleagues in the planning department as to why does it take 2 years to approve a daycare center, things like that. So I think we have to ask, I ask myself, who told me as a planner that it's my job to maintain the status quo? That's not my job. My job is to transform my society, to improve living conditions. If that's not what we do, if that's not the outcome of what we do, then we have to question what are we busy with and what are we actually doing, you know? So there's a lot of effort and time spent on so many, you know, legal processes and administrative processes, etc. But it doesn't translate to a better life for our communities and for our families. We as planners are in the unique position to actually make a huge change in our societies, in our country. And a lot of other people in their normal working life doesn't get to, you know, they don't get to do that. So why are we shying away from claiming that space? So those are the things that I'm left with this morning. Thanks, Kayla.
Thank you so much, Debbie. As always, it's so wonderful to have you here. And just for reminding us about the kind of multidisciplinary approach that is required if we are to make planning a co-production project. Catalina, final thoughts?
That's a very hard act to follow. I think that we have covered all. But if I may, I think we cannot lose the impetus of social change. And I think for me, planners are the storytellers of the imagination of the city, of how the city could be. And I think in that regard, it's something important to remember now is that we need to be organizers, caretakers, you know, introduce a culture of care, but also how to learn and to teach how to put in place the co-responsibility for producing a better life for all. And I think the co-responsibility is something that we perhaps need to be thinking more through about how to make that as part of the DNA of how we operate. And I think co-production is one way and the most productive way to keep making and thinking and making this happen and changing the realities of people. And again, planners have the duty to contribute to spatial justice. And we are absolutely essential to make this place a better world. And the visionary thinking cannot be taken away. And in moments of despair, we need more than ever a spatial imagination. And it's that imagination and creativity what keep us going. So thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure to sharing with you.
Thank you so much, Catalina, and for concluding with what is our departure point actually as planners, and that is that we are all working within a paradigm of spatial justice, and that co-production is absolutely essential to the ideals of spatial justice. So let me hand over to Sam to take us into closing, and just again from my side, a huge thank you to our panelists and to our audience for engaging.
Yeah, let me say a very big thank you to our presenters, our speakers, Dr. Catalina, Dr. Faith Kasim, Professor Arnold, Debbie Hendricks. We really, really appreciate you for sharing your thoughts on this very important issue on the institutional dimension of this co-production. And also we thank all our audience, our guests who took our time to be here, because without you, it would be very boring. So we really appreciate every guest, those who make contributions, Koletani, Zulu, Norma, Soret. We thank every one of you for your contributions towards the fulfillment of this World Planning Day and this room in particular. I want to bring it to a close at this time. Hope to see some of you at the panel discussion tomorrow as we draw the two-day program to a close. Thank you very much, and do have a wonderful time. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye, Mr. Samuel.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, Kayla.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.